Our next session is a travel advice clinic with our good friends at Wanderlust magazine. They have a wonderful team of experts hosted by Lynn Hughes, founding editor of Wanderlust magazine, who will discuss the impact of coronavirus on travel, give tips on how best to safely travel in the next year and beyond, discuss where we may or may not be able to go, and of course, take your questions. If you'd like to ask a question, just post it in the live chat box and they will answer as many as they can.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wanderlust Travel Advice Clinic. And what a time to be doing this following yesterday evening's announcements. Now, we are coming live to you this morning, so please do go into the chat box and ask your questions of our fantastic panel. So, joining me today, I have some great experts. So, let's start with Paul Charles. Paul, of the PC Agency. Paul is a former BBC News presenter and advisor to Sir Richard Branson. But nowadays, he's founder and CEO of the PC Agency, a leading travel PR company. And Paul has been at the forefront of the coronavirus crisis, appearing as a leading commentator. Indeed, you may well have seen him on your television screens or heard him on the radio in the last 24 hours. And very quickly, Paul, where are you joining us from this morning? This is a travel show, so where are you?
I'm joining from the beautiful Cotswolds near Cirencester, although not so beautiful this morning because it's wet and windy and stormy. But I'm currently self-isolating, having come back from the World Travel and Tourism Council Summit in Mexico last Monday. So doing my time, as it were, in self-isolation.
Oh, right. Well, we'll have to ask you about that later. Okay, thank you, Paul. And then we've also got Chris Wright of Sunvil. Hello, Chris. And Chris is managing director of the Sunvil Group. And he says he's more or less grown up in the industry, having started his career as a holiday rep on the island of Paxos before joining the group. And he's an outdoor enthusiast with a real passion for aviation. But he absolutely loves Greece. So, Chris, where are you joining us from this morning?
Morning, Lynn. I'm coming live from Corfu. Sadly, I'm at Corfu Airport as I'm having to make a mad dash back to the UK after the traffic light announcement yesterday. But it's lovely and sunny here, and everybody's raring to go and ready to welcome the tourists back.
Great. Well, we'll hear more about that. And we don't feel sorry for you at all having to come back. It's pouring with rain here in the UK, just so you know. You'll love it. Right. We've also got Jim Eastwood, Jim of Travel Counsellors. Morning, Jim. So Jim was appointed Travel Counsellors Global Sales Director in February 27, and since then has been instrumental in leading continuous double-digit growth. However, if you recognise Jim, not only has he been popping up on media talking about coronavirus and the current situation, but he actually rose to prominence in 2011 as a runner-up in The Apprentice television programme. And indeed, Sir Alan Sugar said he was his greatest ever salesperson. But that isn't why we've got him here today. Fortunately, he knows a lot about travel too, being part of the amazing Travel Counsellors group. So good morning, Jim. And where are you joining us from?
Good morning, Lynn. Good morning, everyone. I am in wet and windy mid-Ulster in Northern Ireland, and I know it's wet and windy because the kids' basketball net has blown over in the background, and it's a sign that we all need to go to sunnier climes, isn't it?
Doesn't it? Oh, I mean, if there's a day where we really all want to get away, I think today is it. So let's hope we're going to have good news for people this morning. Thank you, Jim. And then last but not least, we have Sasha Gainullin of Battleface, which is a leading insurance company. And no one knows customer needs involving emergency travel, medical assistance, emergency evacuation, insurance claims like Sasha. So, and he's got over 20 years experience in the space. So if you have any burning insurance questions, then obviously Sasha is going to be your man. So good morning, Sasha. And I think it's a very early morning for you because where are you joining us from?
Good morning. I am in Columbus, Ohio. Yes, it is pretty early, but it's, we have 2 young kids, so this is the best time for me.
Absolutely. Okay, well, thank you for joining us today. I see we're already getting lots of questions and coming into the chat box. I'll be looking at those in a moment. But first of all, let's just think about the news that we heard yesterday from the government. So, Paul, maybe I'll come to you first. What was your reaction to the announcement yesterday evening from Grant Shapps?
Unprintable, Lynn. Unbelievable. Woefully inadequate. Really poor, abysmal initial green list, frankly, because there are so many other countries which meet the government criteria and deserve to go green. And it's a question as to the ones that have been chosen, whether in fact some of them do meet the government criteria. Certainly Brunei doesn't on a number of the measures. There are 4 measures which the government looks at: number of infections, the vaccination rate, the ability to spot variants, and the credibility of the data. And I would argue certainly one country on that list does not meet those criteria. So it'll be interesting when the government publishes their findings as to why they've chosen those 12 countries. We'll be able to decipher what they're up to. But I actually think, as I'm sure we'll explore in the next 40 minutes or so, there is more complexity as a result of this announcement, more confusion for consumers, and it will do very little to help recovery and a restart in the sector.
No, absolutely. In fact, Chris, let's go to you as you're in Corfu. And I think some people were, well, obviously a lot of people hoping that Greece was going to be on the list. And if not Greece as a whole, that at least some of the Greek islands were going to be on the list. What's been the reaction in Greece?
I think everybody's been fairly dismayed. As a company, we were fairly sure that Greece was going to be amber, at least for this next period. But they've been doing so much work here in making sure that the vaccinations, all of the islands, the smaller islands, have all been vaccinated, are intending to be fully vaccinated by the opening of tourism around the 14th of May. And they've been doing so much to try and suppress it, and kept all of the citizens here locked down, prepared for the start of the tourist season, general dismay really. Interestingly, we have seen quite a lot of our customers contact this morning to say that they still would like to travel, even though it's on the amber list. Obviously, there's a few more hoops to jump through, but there are those die-hard travellers that do still want to travel. But I think it's really going to be sort of mid-end of June now before we can get any volume of passengers away. So that's really what we're working to. But life on the ground here is very much back. Monday, tavernas and everything started to reopen. There's a real buzz around, and it's just a great place to be right now, and feels very much safer than being in the UK.
Thank you. Paul, just coming back to you for a moment, and a question we're already getting asked. Which countries do you think will be added to the green list next time, or have a good chance to be?
Well, it's a bit of a crystal ball. I mean, we've been following the data for nearly a year now, and we've got a pretty good track record. And, we have to weigh up the sort of advice we get from those in the industry, government contacts we deal with, medical experts, those around the world, a lot of sources that give us the information to predict. So we did get some of the countries right. And as I say, it's very surprising some of those that have been added. For example, the Caribbean not being on the list is extraordinary, bearing in mind the great lengths that countries like Grenada, Barbados, Antigua, St. Lucia have gone to deliberately try and meet the government criteria. So I'm very surprised that some of those weren't on the list in the green. I overall agree with Chris. I think you're going to see on the next review, which is due to be the 7th of June, 3 weeks after the 17th of May restart, I think on the 7th of June, you'll see more greens being added, and I suspect you will see some of the Caribbean, as well as some of those Greek islands, possibly the Balearics, and a signal of intent to add France, Italy, Spain before the end of June. And I still think they will be added before the end of June. Their infection rates will go down sharply over the next month due to lockdowns, due to their vaccine program rolling out. And similar to June last year, they were in very good shape by the end of June. And then, of course, the UK allowed people to travel from the beginning of July to those countries. So you'll definitely see a strong July, August, no doubt about it, in Europe, as all these things come to fruition. So, the next green countries will be most of Europe from the review on the 7th of June, but certainly by the end of June.
Mm. And Jim, let's come to you and travel counsellors, who of course are this huge network of travel advisors. Um, what's the kind of message that you're giving out at the moment, or your advisors are giving out to the public? And should people be waiting, for instance, to see which countries come up, or should they be booking ahead now? What's that general advice that you're giving out?
I really share in Paul's optimism for the future as well, the more and green markets being unveiled. And it's cautious optimism, isn't it? It's all about reassurance. Customers seem to want to know, is my money safe with the likes of travel counsellors, 100% financial protection? Am I going to get a refund if I want that? Can I rebook to another time? Can I cancel? Does my insurance, we've got Sasha from Battleface, does my insurance cover me in case of disruption to travel or things related to COVID? So customers want reassurance, and that's what our network of travel advisors and travel counsellors try to provide. But there's also massive pent up demand, right? So if they can't go to the Caribbean, they might go to Cornwall, and if they can't go to Paxos, they might go to Portugal. As soon as something opens up and they get a chink of light, customers are keen to go. And over the last week, especially last night, already today, the spike that you see in inquiries shows and demonstrates that pent up demand. All our travel counsellors try to do is provide reassurance and make sure that customers can book with confidence.
Now, presumably, a lot of that must be people booking Portugal. I know certainly our website, for instance, went crazy for people looking at Portugal articles yesterday evening. And is that what's going to happen? Are we going to see this huge, influx of people going to, say, Portugal at the moment? Or are people going to be a bit more cautious?
I think there's supply and demand at play, right? If there's limited capacity, whether it be flights or resorts, some people are scrambling to get to there, and those destinations that have got the nod in that respect and are green. But Paul articulated it perfectly. More and more countries will meet the criteria and will hopefully move into amber and green, and that will give people confidence that when the proper summer holiday period, mainstay of July and August, rolls around, that they hopefully might get to Greece and Spain and Italy and France and all these places that they want to go to. It was really interesting in November and December, I'm sure Paul and Chris could mention this, that when people couldn't go to some markets, they went to new markets, and they went to the Indian Ocean and the Caribbean more than ever. So that pent up demand means that I think customers will want to go somewhere, and if it's restricted, it's almost anywhere they can.
Yeah, perhaps not surprisingly. But Sasha, I think one of the burning questions that certainly I keep getting asked about to do with insurance is, with this new traffic light system, what happens if, for instance, you've gone away somewhere that's on the green list and then it changes and suddenly it's on the amber or even the red list? Situations like that. Is that covered in the insurance? What does happen to your insurance?
It depends on the company. It depends on products, of course. And we always encourage travelers to look for a policy that would be flexible. And that's what we've seen last year when travelers were going to places that first were on the green list when they were booking the flight. And when they were actually set to travel, for example, it was already on the red list. So yeah, there are some limitations with policies where there are exclusions where you are not able to receive full cover if you are in the red list, or if you're in the country that changes while you're traveling as well. Some policies would exclude if you don't return back home, and that was in the onset of the pandemic that was happening to travelers as well. So our advice is always to look for a policy that is flexible to change your travel dates as well. If there are any changes with the travel itinerary before or while you're traveling, as well as that would provide full protection in the countries that could potentially be on the red list as well.
Oh, absolutely. And Chris, when people are actually looking to book a holiday, what questions should they be asking of the travel company? What should they be thinking about before they book?
I think the main question that everybody should ask as their first one is what's the company's COVID policy, and so many companies have come out now with a dedicated COVID response, and as a company ourselves, we say that if a country goes onto the amber list, as Greece and most of the other European countries have, then they get the option of either deferring to next year, getting a refund credit note, or getting a cash refund. So I think be open and honest with the tour operator, the travel agent. Ask the questions, find out what your circumstances are. If a country gets moved from one to another, can you have a refund? Can you move? And just ask all the questions that might have come up in your mind over last year if people travelled and got caught out. I think going to a specialist is the way forward, and I think we've seen a definite return to travel agents and tour operators that do packages, and I think that's likely to go forward into the next year because you get all the expert advice. You have destination specialists that know exactly what forms are needed to get into a country and to get back into the UK, and I think that's where it is forward. Just make sure you're armed with all the information.
Oh, good advice, wise words. I think we all need expert advice at these times. And Sasha, that presumably does apply to insurance as well. I mean, so many of us these days get, for instance, a free insurance policy with a bank account or with a credit card or, with some sort of product we've bought. Are those up to the job? Are those adequate?
From our experience that we've seen so far in the last year, no, because those policies have been pre-written, predetermined before COVID-19, and certainly you would see quite a bit of exclusions and limitations, especially while traveling under the advisory times. Certainly, again, check with your travel insurance provider or the credit card or a bank where the policy was taken out of, just to make sure that there is full coverage available for the destination where you're traveling to. And the key is to really check against the destination information. Will my trip be covered? Will I be covered while I'm there against emergencies, medical expenses, even for medical care for COVID-19 diagnosis? That's also important as well. And what happens if there is a change of flight, travel dates? That's one of the key aspects right now when you're traveling, and travel insurance is make sure that your policy is flexible to be adjusted as well. Just like your ticket could be changed, your travel insurance should have the ability to change the travel dates as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Paul, somebody is asking about the chances of going to Dubai. Will that get to go onto the green or amber list? And should they be looking to move their holiday?
A lot of people want it to go onto the amber or green list. I think one of the problems is Dubai is obviously one of the 3 Gulf transit hubs alongside Doha and Qatar and obviously Abu Dhabi. So the problem is the government have signaled already, and in fact the Transport Secretary said this the other day, that they're concerned about these transit hubs because they can't assess the movement of people in that hub, as it were. They're not entirely sure where everybody's coming from, the safety measures in place to stop variants moving around. They're more risk, basically. And so I'm afraid at the moment, I would say those transit hubs have their work cut out to get the confidence of the UK government team to put them back into amber, or certainly anywhere near green. And the government know that by not including Dubai in the amber or green list, they're preventing a lot of travel, of course, and transit onto other countries. So it is a problem because those hubs have become very successful, very dynamic. And obviously, they've built up successful airlines like Emirates, Etihad, and Qatar Airways as a result. But it's a major issue, and those airlines are certainly lobbying the government at the moment to get them to change their mind. Of course, they need to see the infections come down in those places as well, and they are starting to, but they're still quite high.
Absolutely. And while I've got you, somebody's asking about the free lateral flow tests. Do you know anything about the situation on that? Will those, become acceptable?
Well, the government hinted, and again, leaked, hinted, choose your word, that they would in fact allow lateral flow testing using the free NHS lateral flow tests that you'd be able to take abroad with you, and use that certainly from a green country to help reduce the costs of testing. But no mention was made of it yesterday, and it's been left a little bit woolly at the moment. And as far as I can tell, even this morning, there's still no clarity or absolute clarity on whether you can take one of the free lateral flow tests with you on your trip and use it to come back from a green country as part of your pre-departure test up to 72 hours before you come back to the UK. So at the moment, you still, until there's clarity, you still have to take the PCR test or a rapid antigen test that meets the government specificity and sensitivity levels. Quite complicated. And again, this adds to the complexity for consumers. They don't know this stuff. It's hard enough for us as people working in the sector, and even more reason to go and see a travel agent or a tour operator to get this straight, because this the advice is not going to be easily found just booking a flight from an airline online. So we need an answer to that. It is one of the most common questions I'm seeing as well, Lynn, in lots of places at the moment. But I think nothing's going to change before May the 17th anyway. So there's still time to get some clarity. We still have, 10 days, 8 days to get that clarity. So jury's out on that one. Let's see. But it's a question that needs to be answered by the government.
It does. And I'm sure they'll be under a lot of pressure to answer that. Right. I don't know if either Chris or Jim can help with this one, but somebody's hoping to go to Antarctica. How wonderful. Dream for all of us, although I am lucky enough to have been. But they're wondering if there really will be a chance of going this winter. Is that something one of you can answer? I mean, I presume there'll be a bit of an issue with going via South America, will there?
Yeah, I think anybody's guess, and anybody's guess at the moment, and we're all in the industry very hopeful that by the autumn, most countries in the world will be accessible and ready to travel to. But until we see what happens over the next few months, I just don't think anybody can be 100% sure at the moment. As we saw last year, sort of cases did drop off during the summer months. And then start to ramp up again in the autumn. But I think the vaccination level was up all around the world, that hopefully that wave at the end of the summer won't come back, and that by the autumn time that the all countries around the world, or majority, should be in a better to all this and allow sort of travel freely as we go through into the winter months.
Yeah, because obviously people will be thinking long haul for the winter months, won't they? And so, Jim, obviously, if somebody, when you travel to Antarctica, you go on an expedition ship once you're there. What is the situation with cruise? Again, do you see cruise coming back? Are people asking to go on cruise ship?
Really, really interesting around cruise. It's now 25% of our sales mix, and that's really uncharacteristic for us. But let me talk to that a little bit. So if we are anywhere between 50 and 75% of pre-pandemic levels for bookings, right? There's not as many departures happening, but bookings. People are planning for the future, and what they're planning in respect to cruise are two things mainly. One, staycations have kicked off, right? We've even got Virgin Voyages and Disney and all of these staycations, P&O and others who are going around the UK, which may or may not be everyone's cup of tea, but it's an option, and it's been one that has been embraced heavily by many customers. And the second phase of cruising seems to be that because the cruising schedule for 2022 and 2023 comes out more in advance than a lot of other aspects of travel, there's a lot of forward bookings, and people are excited to get back to cruising. Cruising has done a lot from a marketing perspective and protocol perspective, and there's been new ships launched and lots of appetite. So it seemed like, in many respects for consumers, if we're to judge by buying behaviors, safe bet for staycations now, and a safe bet for that 2022, 2023 travel in the future. But I think we'd all love an expedition around Antarctica or the Galapagos or somewhere like that on a luxury liner, wouldn't we?
Totally. I think, Alice, we're very, very jealous of you. But whether you get there this winter or the following, you're going to love it. It really
Lynn,
is one of the most special things you can do.
can I
Paul.
just add to it that obviously you can get to Antarctica at the luxury end as well through a company like White Desert, for example, where you can sleep in pods, luxury pods in Antarctica, and you fly in via South Africa. So it's not just South America you need to be watching, but also South Africa, where you can fly in by jet into Antarctica. And it'll be interesting to see how South Africa does, because I think that will come off the red list later this year as well.
Yes, you could well be right there. There's a lot of people hoping. But Paul, another question for you, I think, really about airports. And because obviously we've seen, where's this one? Question from David. Yes, given the recent news about Heathrow, will the Home Office get passport control and COVID checks working okay at airports? I mean, Chris is probably going to find out in a couple of hours' time.
Yeah,
can report back.
I hope you've got lots of time on your hands, Chris. You might need it when you come back. I mean, I flew through Gatwick last Monday, and to be fair and to credit Border Force, it was brilliant. I literally got through within about 60 seconds. Admittedly, there were only a handful of flights, but even though they were checking everything manually, which is why the queues are happening, it was seamless. But that was Gatwick, and there's very few flights, as I say. In terms of Heathrow and what will be busier, then obviously it is much tougher because there are more flights going in. So you're having to wait much longer because they're checking everything. There's a very clear story on the front page of the Daily Telegraph this morning about Border Force admitting in the press conference yesterday that it's going to be 15 to 20 times worse or so to get through gates as the volumes go up, as the number of people travelling goes up over the summer. And it will get worse. And they're saying they won't have the e-gates ready. They might not have the digital technology ready. So that's going to be the next issue. And frankly, there have been months to prepare for this. So it's woefully inadequate that the government has not got this right at the border and is not opening things up. And one of the reasons why the queues are there is not just because of the manual checks, it's because of the complexity of paperwork that consumers are having to fill in. We're living in an age where paperwork should be less and less, where everything should be far more digital, far fewer tough questions to answer, far fewer processes. But the government have made this worse. And my fear for the sector is it's going to take some time to untangle all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, I think you had something to add on this.
Yeah, I was just going to say that over the last few months, there's been some horror stories about Heathrow and 6-hour waits and that sort of thing. But it really does depend on the time of day that you're travelling. And there are, just as Paul said, through Gatwick, there are times that you can breeze through Heathrow with very, very little wait. But there are other times when there are bottlenecks. And hopefully, over the next few weeks, as more terminal space starts to open up, I think Terminal 3 is due to come back online, although that might have changed now that America didn't come onto the store amber list yesterday. So we'll see. I think as terminal space opens up, there will be more staff on, and I think there'll be ups and downs. But it's going to be an interesting one that we have to wait and see, really.
No, absolutely. Now, I think there's a question here we might not be able to answer, but Gillian was asking about the NHS app and the proof of vaccine, because this is something that's probably going to become more and more key, isn't it, having proof of vaccine? And Gillian points out there are many people whose phones do not support the app, and what will the alternatives be? I presume, Paul, though, this is a bit like the question of about the lateral flow test, that the government really hasn't come up with any answers yet.
Well, they're working on it, to be fair to them, but they said and repeated yesterday that at the press conference that, in fact, you could ask your GP for proof of your vaccination status. And all the GPs I know have got much better things to be doing, frankly, than to be writing out and confirming that, because it should go on the app. So there's the option, if you do travel after the 17th of May and you do need vaccination proof to go into a green country, that you could take paper proof, of course. And I know that the cards that you get once you've been jabbed have been shown by two countries around the world by British consulates to show them what it looks like. The government says it's possible by 17th of May it will have the NHS app working. That's if you've downloaded it, the patient app. And it will, of course, show your jab status and whether you've been jabbed once or twice. The overall rule here, though, for anybody traveling is to really check and do the detective work, either yourself or preferably through a travel agent or a tour operator, on the country you're going to. It's absolutely vital because they all have their own individual rules. And it's one of the failings of the last year that governments have not got together and created the consistency that's needed for seamless travel. They've all, perhaps understandably, protected their own markets and their own countries because they've been so fearful. So they've all, as a result, come up with different rules and regulations. And it's vital you check, even though a country may be green, what the rules are. I'm going to give you a quick example. St. Helena, which is one of the British overseas territories, went green yesterday. Yes, beautiful new airport, but you've got to quarantine for 14 days when you arrive. So in my view, it's totally irresponsible for the government to put it on the green list, suggesting that it's clear to go to. So you really have to check what's going on at the destination as much as what's going on when you get back to the UK.
No, that's a very good point. And of course, to get to St. Helena as well, you've got to go via South Africa, which is red at the moment, which is red. And that is the other, really adds to the complexity of all of this. So, Sasha, a question from Julie about insurance. Could you advise a place? Now, obviously, you've got a brilliant insurance company, Battleface, but so of course, which we highly recommend. But thinking, if you weren't just going to recommend your own company, can you advise a place to look for an insurance company which does cover for COVID? As all the reputable companies seem to have an exclusion for any communicable diseases at the moment. Is that right?
Yes, that's true. And there's two components, of course, to the policy: coverage for COVID-19 and coverage for FCDO travel advisories. Those are the two components. Even if a company is offering coverage for COVID-19 medical expenses, you might have the FCDO travel advisory exclusion. So, of course, Battleface.com is the place to go to. But there are some other companies out there. One of the companies that I like a lot is Voyager Travel Insurance. They seem to be quite up to speed as well with policies and creating products that are geared towards two different environments. But yeah, there's certainly some research and review of different policies. And what we were talking about destinations as well is quite important because many countries around the world are now also coming out with requirements what type of travel insurance you need to have. And it also goes country by country. Some countries even go to the extent of requiring airlines to check if travel insurance is valid before you can actually board the plane.
Right.
But yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
Certainly, Battleface is the place to go because we've been developing the products for the last 12 months to continue to be relevant to today's environment.
Which is, of course, why we've got you on the panel, Sasha, because we were looking for the best in their field. But obviously, it's built itself as well on that reputation. So, Paul, you again, I think, for this one, because obviously you mentioned earlier on the next review of the green, amber and red list will be on the 7th of June. But Laura asks, when will these changes actually take effect? Do they start straight away on the 7th of June? Or is it that they are starting, obviously, a week later, 3 weeks later, whatever?
Well, that clarity we're still waiting for. It's a very good question. And gosh, if only we were all running government, eh? But they're questions everybody wants to know. Sadly, I don't think there's really an answer on that yet. We're still waiting for that clarity. Exactly, if they announce it on the 7th of June, when will it take effect from? We do know, of course, that as part of the whole Global Travel Task Force process, there is another checkpoint, as the government is calling it, on June the 28th. Now, that's not necessarily a review of countries for the traffic lights. That is more a review of whether they can remove some of these onerous testing requirements. And it could be by then, and I'm hopeful, that things will have improved and stabilized so much, especially in Europe, that maybe some of these tests won't be needed. Maybe the tests from the green country won't be needed. And maybe they can change the PCR test that you have to take when you get back to the UK into a lateral flow, for example, or even no test. So let's hope that things keep going in the right direction. I think overall, I know we're looking at the detail here, but there are positives. There is a restart. The government have stuck to their May date, which they said they would in their roadmap published in February, and which many of us were calling for a May restart. Portugal is a big country, popular country. It's good to have it on the green list. So there are positives. And despite all these details we're still waiting for, and I think we'll get them this week as we push for clarification, we should be positive about what's coming in the next few weeks, and also at a time when most people travel, of course, in July and August.
Mm. Yes, absolutely. And I know so many people want to. I mean, Jim mentioned before about the pent-up demand, and it really feels that there is. But Jim, if people are thinking, oh, there's too much to worry about at the moment, to think about, I don't know what to do about tests, there's all these advisories. Are you taking bookings for next year, even for the year after? How far ahead are people thinking and booking?
There's a few factors at play. At the risk of saying what everyone has said before, there's never been more relevance and prominence for trusted travel advice, and whether that's travel counsellors or anyone else, Sunvil, all of these companies have a unique position at the moment, because to Paul's point, when there's chaos and ambiguity, when there's complexity and lack of clarity, people want guidance, instruction. They want their hand held. I would, as a consumer, I wouldn't dream of booking without consulting an expert. So that's rising to prominence. But with that expert advice comes, subject to the rules and regs and caution. So even though there's pent up demand and people want to go now, they want to travel safely, and there's a duty of care from travel experts to make sure that consumers travel safely, of course, and the government are trying to support with that as well. So there'll be a great late market. Paul articulated perfectly. When there's more green and amber markets, people will go there quickly, because they think if they can go there now, willing to get the expert advice and do the testing and get back safely, it's job done. The pressure is off the pressure cooker, because we've all been locked down for too long. But then similarly, people who are more cautious, who are happy to wait, or maybe having a staycation in the meantime, are saying, right, we'll have that big trip, that bucket list trip, and get some winter sun in the months later on in the year and early 2022. So there's all of that to look forward to, maybe Caribbean, Indian Ocean, hopefully as well. Beyond that as well, people want to get back to the US, right? And there's lots of bookings for the US, for Spain, for Greece in 2022, for the summer months in 2022, saying, right, I'm going to wait till it all dies down, and I'm going to punt it a little bit further out. And then beyond that as well, I mentioned cruise. But what we'll see, and I think you'll agree, and it makes sense, is that if people have been locked down, there is also some more disposable income, notwithstanding the financial impact this has had on many. For some, there is more disposable income. So people are saying, I'm going to have the big trip, the multi-generational trip. I'm going to bring family, extended family, and we're going to go somewhere in 2022, maybe even later in the year as well. And we're going to go for that big trip that we never thought we could have afforded, but we now can. So there's a whole mix out there, and we have to cater for it all.
No, absolutely. And Chris, talking about travel companies as well. I mean, we've already been asked how somebody finds an insurance company, but how does somebody find a travel company in the first place, a good travel company or agent? What should they be looking for? Because I think as places open and they, Jim said, talk about, the lates, people will suddenly think, right, I want to go away next week. How does somebody find a good, reputable company or agent? Obviously, there's Sunvil and there's travel counsellors, but it'd be our first recommendation. But what should they be thinking about?
I think so many of our guests come to us via word of mouth and or sort of having seen us on review sites, and so many travellers that did travel last year left positive reviews as to how we'd handled the situation, and that they felt that their hands were held. Jim mentioned that earlier. It's all about the hand holding and that sort of thing. And I think if you look for reviews, there's so many of them around now. I get word of mouth recommendations. The trade organizations like ABTA and the Travel Trust Association and that sort of thing. So look on these lists, and you can normally find a good list of travel agents, especially in your local area. Just on the high street, there's still high travel agents, and give some business locally, and return to the high street is always a good one as well.
Mm. And presumably there should always be a phone number, because I've seen companies where you can't actually find a phone number. I mean, I don't know about people viewing, but I want to be able to talk to somebody, actual person, real life person.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. We had so many reports last year of people that couldn't get hold of anybody. Even down here in Greece, we had guests that were sort of arriving down here. They hadn't been able to get hold of their travel company, and they'd found out that the hotel was closed when they got here. That was happening at several destinations around Europe, where some of the larger online travel agents and travel operators just hadn't been able to cope with the demand of deferrals and rebookings and that sort of thing, and just hadn't been communicating. So I think make sure you book, as long as you can get through to the operator. If you build a personal relationship, I think Travel Counsellors is great with that. You build a personal relationship with your travel advisor, and most of them. The 4 hours emergency number, and we'll sort of deal with problems out of hours. So it's just making sure you've got all those ducks in line, and that you can get hold of them if something goes wrong.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sasha, quickly, I presume, does the same apply to insurance companies? I mean, I know you're quite a tech company, do a lot of it online, but can we actually ring up an insurance company and ask questions?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the key components as well. Once it comes to travel insurance, if you're on a website and you can't find a telephone number that you could speak to someone then that's a problem as well. And that's one of the reviews that we've been getting quite a bit. That there's always someone available to have a conversation with, and that's an extremely important factor for travel insurance 24/7, because it becomes relevant before, while, and after you travel, is to be able to speak to somebody at any given time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that message is coming over loud and clear. So I think in these times, we need to know that we can speak to somebody. Does anybody know? We've got a question here from Pauline. Are there going to be border force problems with Eurostar, or is it only air travel?
Oh, I could probably answer that. Eurostar actually is just putting back another extra service to Paris. So 2 a day. Used to be pre-pandemic, I think about 14 a day or 15 a day. So they're having to rebuild, and have been through such sad, terrible times. I used to work for Eurostar, so it's very sad what's going on for a lot of former colleagues. In terms of border force, it's going to be a test. There are border force officials there, of course, but with only 2 trains a day, I wouldn't anticipate any major issues yet. Of course, France needs to be added to green before Eurostar will be upping its timetable. So it will be an issue potentially later in June, and certainly into July, if border force has still got the same controls in place. But as I say, they may be reviewed on June the 28th.
Yeah, sure. Paul, while I've got you, we've mentioned the US a couple of times, and people interested in that. Have you got any feeling for when the US will open up to, well, all travellers, I guess, but particularly to UK travellers?
So I'll be very honest, I've taken some criticism on Twitter on this, because a lot of people were querying why I was talking so strongly about the US. I had very good intelligence, and so did others, that the USA would be opening up before the end of May, and certainly ahead of President Biden's visit on June the 11th to the UK for the G7. So I was very strongly saying that I believed the USA was going to open up, and there were a lot of sources telling me that direction. And I think it was changed at the last minute for some reason. But there are talks going on, regular talks between the UK and the US to open the two countries. They're the most vaccinated nations in the world. Over 50% of their populations are now vaccinated. The Americans are traveling pretty freely, albeit against a travel advisory, but they can travel. And trust me, being in Mexico last week, there are so many Americans in Mexico traveling, living normally, having a good time, filling the aircraft out of the US into Cancun. It will open up before the end of June. The airlines expect it to. And I think there's still some last minute negotiations going on, but it's imminent. And definitely, I think we'll see the US opening in June. But I'll be the first to admit, you can't get every country right, but the intelligence was very strong about the US in the last few days.
Yes. Oh, thank you, Paul. I mean, I'd have thought with Biden coming over next month that things will hopefully change. Yes. Right, we are running out of time, which is a shame because there's a couple of questions we haven't really got to go to. So just very quickly, I think, Jim, how optimistic are you that we are going to get a summer holiday? We are going to be going away in July and August.
Listen, there's a few hoops to jump through, right? But Chris is in Greece and Paul is just back from Mexico, and Sasha is sitting in the States, and I'm traveling for business every week as well. But my point is, we're all jumping through hoops a little bit, aren't we? And we're all seeking advice and clarity. But it's there. More advice from the government yesterday and travel experts to provide that clarity. Hold your hand, manage expectations, and refund, rebook, or credit refund if it all goes wrong. People will get away if they want to, and if you're terribly cautious, you can book for further down the line. There's options for everyone, and as I said earlier, as corny as it sounds, if it's Cornwall or the Caribbean, you might have to choose between both when you go to either of those places, and where you decide to go either now or later. If I'm thinking about my young family, I've got 4 kids under 9. And my wife and I would dearly love to get away with the kids. We want to do it safely, and we want to do it with advice, and we know we can. And increasingly, we'll watch for those countries that we'd like to visit coming on to Green and Amber, and we'll hopefully book with confidence, knowing that we have to jump through a few hoops to get there.
Yeah, perfect. Good way to finish. So, thank you to the great panel. There's so many words of wisdom there. And I think the overall message from you all seemed to be, we can be optimistic, but cautiously optimistic. There will be lots of changes. Hopefully, the world will be opening up over the coming weeks and months. But do take expert advice. I think we'd all agree. Do your homework, but use a trusted tour operator or a trusted travel agent. Use a trusted insurance company, and get the best possible advice you can. Would you all agree with that? Yeah,
definitely.
And
absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. And hopefully we'll all be meeting again at the Destination Show next year. I'm hoping we're all going to be meeting in the flesh, and I'm hoping we're going to be talking about inspiring ideas and without all the regulations and the paperwork, the tests, and the world will be a different and better place. So thank you again to the panel. You've been great. Thank you all to everybody who's been watching. Sorry we couldn't get through absolutely every question, but I do hope that was really useful for you. And do carry on at the Destination Show virtually over the weekend, calling in on the booth, because there's a lot of very good information and expert advice around with the exhibitors. So thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.